In this video, we're going to be going over how to integrate a screen flow into a legendary search component. So first we're going to go over how to set up the flow in the legendary search component, how it works, and then we'll go into how to set up an example flow. So from your legendary search component in setup, go down into your buttons where we've added the additional actions, and now whenever you go down here, one of your types you have to select is custom, dynamic entry, or flow. And when you select flow, you'll be expected to put the button label here in label and the API name of the flow in the name field. Some additional options you have is to hide the cancel button, hide the close button, disable close on finish, or refresh on finish. And we'll go over what each one of those buttons does. So over here I have the example search component already loaded. I can go in here and select some records and click scrap. In this example we're selecting inventory that we wish to scrap, and the screen will ask us, and this is now launching the screen flow that we've set up, to confirm that we wish to scrap the following records. And then we have some debug fields here where you can see the parameters that are being passed into your flow are the primary parental record ID of the page you are on and the selected record IDs, which you see here. If I select no records, this is flow functionality built into the flow. It will tell me that no records are selected and give me that error message. So now let's go into what some of those buttons are doing in regards to this flow. So we had hide cancel enabled. Let's go ahead and we'll turn that back on so that cancel is not hidden. Refresh the page. Now when I select my records to scrap, I have a cancel option here as well as the next button in the flow. The cancel button will show up in the modal footer as opposed to the screen flow. So if you wish to hide that, you can just click the hide cancel button and then this whole footer will not show and you will only see the buttons within the flow. So again, I'll re-enable that for hide cancel. Refresh this, and now that cancel button is no longer available here. I can still close the flow by clicking the X up here, and that will close the modal. If I wish to disable that, I can do hide close, and this will no longer even show the close button with the X at the top. If we do this, this is going to make it in such a way that the only way to get out of the flow modal is to finish the flow or to refresh the page. And then again, you can also disable close on finish or disable refresh on finish. So by default, whenever you finish your flow, it's going to close the modal and it's going to refresh your search component. So fire that search component to research the appropriate records. That way, if something in your flow has updated the records to no longer meet the criteria to show up in this search component, that it would fire the search and that record would no longer be there. So for example, let's select these two hard drives and I'm going to click scrap. I'm going to confirm that we wish to scrap the following records. This will say that the inventory has been successfully updated. We'll click finish. It will refresh. Those two hard drives are no longer there. And it researched my search component for me. And this is how I would integrate a screen flow into a legendary search component. Now that we've gone over the search component functionality and how the flow works integrated into that search component, let's look at how we would actually set up one of these flows to be able to integrate into a search component. So in this example, and this will be a common scenario, that we are selecting records and we wish to update those records and then refire the search on the search component. In this case, we're updating the inventory to scrapped. So I have an inventory scrap screen flow. The first thing that we do whenever you set up one of these flows is you want to set up your variables, and Two of the variables that need to be formatted this way is record IDs. So the API name needs to be record IDs, lowercase r, capital I for that camel case. Type will be text. You need to allow multiple values because this will be a collection of records, and allow for input. The second variable you need to set up is record ID, lowercase r, capital I, type is text, allow for input, but we are not allowing for multiple variables. In this flow, I'm not using the record ID for anything, I'm just using the selected record IDs. And the first thing I'm looking at is a decision to ask if the record IDs is empty. If the record IDs are empty, the outcome I have is I'm going to display an error message, and I'm going to say no records selected. In my screens, I am hiding the header, so I've clicked show header equals false. Otherwise, if I enabled it, it would just have the name of the flow up here at the top. If you want that, you can leave that enabled. That part doesn't really make a difference. Second step I'm doing is I'm getting my inventories, so I'm querying my inventory. Then I'm looping through my inventory records. I'm assigning them to a variable, and what I'm assigning is inventory names, which is a resource variable of type text. Its default value is an empty string, and default should be empty string so we can append to it, and this is just type text, empty string default. And then here in the assignment, I'm adding the name of the inventory from the current loop, then I'm adding a space dash space, then I'm adding a material name. So this is getting the material name here. And again, this is the inventory's name from the name loop, material name, name. And just to show what that looks like, we're going into our collections for the current inventory loop, and I can see that is the inventory's name loop, and we're going to the material, and then we're getting the material name, which in this case will be here towards the bottom, and so that's going to append the material name. And then we append an HTML break tag, so it'll do a new line after we've appended all of these. And then we would show the first screen where we're going to ask for confirmation to confirm you want to scrap the following records, and this will have a list of all the selected records. Normally I would not have this debug information in here, but just for the video I left that in to show that we are getting that record ID and those record IDs. Those are the two primary variables that we would receive as part of your flow. Then I am looping over, now the second loop of looping over the inventory from get inventories. I can use the same query from before, but I have to do a secondary loop. And then I'm assigning some field updates. So for the current item in the inventory scrap loop, I'm assigning inventory status equal to scrapped, and inventory stage equals to scrapped. And again, that's the inventory scrapped loop, which we've instantiated here. And we have inventory status equals to scrapped. After assigning our field updates, then I have another variable, which is the inventory to update. And so if we go look at this variable, it is a record collection variable, inventory to update, and its data type is record. This is a variable that allows for multiple values, so it is a collection of API type inventory. And so here we are adding to this list of inventory the current item from the loop, which we've updated to now scrap status and stage. And we update our inventory to update. So these are the records that we're updating that we've assigned to that list. And then if it is successful, we'll show a success screen. One thing to note is on here I do configure the footer to only show the finish label. So we use the standard label for the finish or next button. We hide the previous and we hide the pause buttons. So that way they can't go back to before the DML or before the inventory update. And then here when you click on update records, you can also add a fault path. And so we've added that fault path. And then we are rolling back the updates. So no partial updates or anything like that. And then we show an error message for which, there was an error during inventory update, changes were not committed, please contact your system administrator. And so that way they could close the screen and continue on, or contact their admin and let them know there was an error in the process. And when I add the flow to the search component, I do need to get the API name of this flow. So I can go in here to settings and do flow API name, and this is the name I would copy and paste into my search component into the name field here for then integrating that screen flow into my search component. And this is an example of how we would set up a screen flow to integrate into one of our search components. It is worth noting two more things is when they click that finish button, it is the clicking of the finish button on that final success screen that will close the screen flow modal and then make the search component refresh or refire the search, so long as it's enabled in the settings. And when querying a list of records here, one thing I didn't note is just that when I get these inventories, I'm doing it where ID is in record IDs, and I'm getting all records. It will default to only first record, so be sure and get all records because we are querying a collection of inventory in this example. Again, this is how I would set up a screen flow to integrate into a search component. Thank you for watching.